The day the Krythari Armada decided to invade Earth, Ambassador Vel'Kosh nearly choked on his fermented spore wine. He was sitting in the observation deck of the Galactic Council station, a massive rotating construct that hung in neutral space like a bureaucratic disco ball, when the news came through. The Krythari, those six-limbed, perpetually angry lizard things who thought diplomacy meant yelling louder than everyone else, had just declared their intention to conquer the humans' homeworld. Vel'Kosh, a Koraxian with skin like polished obsidian and 3 eyes that could roll independently when he was particularly exasperated, stared at the holographic transmission. His beverage forgotten, he watched Warlord Sk'reth, a particularly massive specimen with scars crisscrossing his scaled hide, proclaim that humanity would be crushed within a single rotation of their pathetic little planet. "This," Vel'Kosh muttered to himself, "is going to be hilarious." Around him, the observation deck had gone silent. Representatives from 47 different species stood frozen, their various appendages, tentacles, and pseudopods hanging limp in shock. Not because they thought the Krythari would succeed. Oh no, that wasn't the issue at all. The issue was that someone had actually been stupid enough to try. Captain Rena Tevs, a Felinian, whose sleek furred form and predatory grace made her look like someone had given a panther opposable thumbs and a pilot's license, padded over to Vel'Kosh's table. Her tail swished behind her in what he'd learned to recognize as barely contained amusement. "Did I just hear what I think I heard?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular purr that meant she was trying not to laugh. "You did," Vel'Kosh confirmed, gesturing to the now looping transmission. Sk'reth was still ranting about humanity's inferior technology, their weak bodies, their lack of natural weapons. Standard Krythari warmongering. "Really? The Krythari have officially declared war on Earth." Rena sat down, her ears flicking forward. "How long do you give them? Before they attack, or before they realize they've made a catastrophic mistake?" "The latter." Vel'Kosh considered this, tapping one long finger against his glass. 3 days, maybe 4. Depends on how quickly they get through the asteroid belt. The thing was, and this was something the Krythari had apparently failed to research, humans were terrifying. Not because they had superior technology. They didn't. Not because they were physically imposing. Most species could snap a human like a twig. No, humans were terrifying because they were absolutely certifiably magnificently insane, and they'd somehow managed to convince the entire galaxy that they were perfectly reasonable neighbors. Take, for example, the incident 3 cycles ago when the Vrexian Empire had attempted to establish a mining operation on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. The humans had politely asked them to leave. The Vrexians, being 5 times the size of an average human and possessing natural armor plating, had laughed and continued drilling. 2 weeks later, the mining station had simply disappeared. No explosions, no battle debris, just gone. The Vrexians filed a complaint with the council, and the humans had shown up with their representative, a small woman named Dr. Keiko Tanaka, who smiled pleasantly and presented 17 hours of footage showing the Vrexians' equipment being systematically dismantled by what could only be described as coordinated acts of creative sabotage. One particularly memorable clip showed a human in a spacesuit surfing on a stolen drill bit while giving a thumbs up to the camera. The Vrexians withdrew their complaint, or the time the Jacqueline Collective had tried to intimidate humanity by parking their war fleet just outside Mars' orbit. The Jacqueline insectoid creatures whose hive mind made them tactically brilliant had expected fear. Instead, within 6 hours, human vessels had surrounded the fleet. Not military ships, mind you, but civilian craft, cargo haulers, mining vessels, even a few luxury yachts. Thousands of them, all broadcasting the same message. Nice ships. Be a shame if something happened to them. The Jacqueline, baffled by the sheer audacity of using civilian vessels as a show of force, had retreated to regroup. They never came back. But Vel'Kosh's personal favorite was the story of Commander Hector Ruiz, the human who'd single-handedly ended the Porthian border dispute. The Porthians, gaseous beings who communicated through bioluminescent flashes, had been feuding with humanity over trading rights for months. The negotiations had stalled because the Porthians kept trying to bully the smaller human delegation. Ruiz, a middle-aged man with graying hair and the demeanor of someone's disappointed uncle, had finally stood up during one particularly heated session, pulled out what the Porthians' translator identified as an accordion, and proceeded to play the most aggressively off-key folk music anyone had ever heard. For 6 hours straight, the Porthians signed the treaty just to make it stop. Now, watching the Krythari Armada preparing to launch their invasion, Vel'Kosh couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of pity and anticipation. The council had tried to warn them, of course. Ambassador Thalaris, an elderly Vox whose crystalline body rang like wind chimes when she moved, had personally reached out to the Krythari High Command. Her message had been simple: "You really don't want to do this." The Krythari, naturally, had interpreted this as weakness. Rena pulled up a tactical display on her wrist-mounted holoscreen, showing the Krythari fleet's current position. 200 warships, each one a kilometer long and bristling with plasma cannons, kinetic railguns, and enough firepower to sterilize a continent. They were moving through the Oort cloud, the outer edge of humanity's solar system, with all the subtlety of a drunken gormath at a diplomatic reception. "Do you think Earth knows they're coming?" Rena asked, zooming in on the lead vessels. Vel'Kosh laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hillside. "Oh, they know. The humans have had detection satellites scattered throughout their system for decades. They probably knew the Krythari were planning this before Sk'reth did." He paused, his 3 eyes focusing on different parts of the tactical display. "The question isn't whether they know, the question is what they're going to do about it." That question was answered approximately 47 minutes later when every communication channel in the council station simultaneously lit up with an incoming transmission from Earth. Vel'Kosh, along with what seemed like every other being in the station, rushed to the nearest display screen. The image that appeared showed a woman in what humans called a military uniform, dark blue with various colorful rectangles attached to it in ways Vel'Kosh had never bothered to understand. She had short silver hair, dark skin marked with age lines, and eyes that suggested she'd seen too much nonsense in her lifetime to be impressed by any more. According to the identification tag, this was Admiral Chioma Okafor, commander of Earth's Planetary Defense Force. "This is Admiral Okafor of the United Earth Defense Command," she began, her voice carrying that particular human qualitative, simultaneously bored and dangerous. "We are aware of the Krythari Armada currently approaching our solar system. We've intercepted their declaration of war, and frankly, we're disappointed." Vel'Kosh leaned forward. "This was going to be good. We've shared cultural exchanges with the Krythari," Okafor continued. "We've traded with them. Hell, I personally attended a Krythari hatching ceremony 3 years ago. Lovely event, by the way, Warlord Sk'reth. Your grandson is adorable. So it pains me to say this, but since you've decided to throw away decades of peaceful relations," she paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed her face. "Well, we're going to have to show you why nobody attacks Earth." The transmission ended. Rena's tail had gone completely still. "That was either the most confident thing I've ever heard." "The most confident thing you've ever heard," Vel'Kosh finished. "Trust me on this." The Krythari fleet continued their approach, undeterred. They crossed Neptune's orbit without incident, then Uranus. By the time they reached Saturn, the entire Galactic Council was glued to their displays, watching the tactical feeds with the fascination usually reserved for gladiatorial combat or reality television, which in Vel'Kosh's opinion were essentially the same thing. The Krythari maintained their formation, a classic spearhead configuration with the heavy battleships at the front and lighter cruisers protecting the flanks. Standard military doctrine, and quite effective against most opponents. The problem was that humans didn't read the standard military doctrine, or if they did, they'd apparently decided it was more of a suggestion than a rule. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Krythari flagship's sensors detected a massive energy signature near Jupiter. Warlord Sk'reth, standing on his command deck with his various subordinates arrayed around him like particularly violent furniture, demanded a full scan of the area. What they found was a single human vessel. Just one. It was called the Crazy Ivan, because of course it was, and it appeared to be a modified mining ship with what looked like a fusion drive that had been souped up to illegal levels and several large modules bolted to its hull in ways that violated at least 37 different safety regulations. Sitting in the pilot's seat, according to the thermal scans, was one human life sign. Sk'reth ordered his fleet to ignore it and continue their approach. One mining vessel posed a no threat to 200 warships. That's when the Crazy Ivan opened fire, except it wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. What it fired was a stream of what human databases cheerfully labeled kinetic penetrators, which was a fancy way of saying rocks. Big rocks. Rocks that had been accelerated to approximately 40% the speed of light using a series of electromagnetic launchers that absolutely should not have been able to fit on a ship that size. The first rock hit a Krythari destroyer dead center, punching through its shields like they were made of tissue paper, and turning the ship into a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated debris. The second rock clipped a cruiser, shearing off its entire port side. The third, fourth, and fifth rocks created a chain reaction that took out 7 more ships in the span of 13 seconds. In the observation deck, someone started a slow clap. It caught on. Warlord Sk'reth was screaming into his communications array, demanding that every ship in the fleet target and destroy the Crazy Ivan immediately. Approximately 60 vessels adjusted their trajectory and opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, even a few experimental disruptor beams that the Krythari had been saving for a special occasion. The Crazy Ivan dodged, not with fancy maneuvering thrusters or advanced evasion systems, mind you. It simply fired its absurdly overpowered fusion drive at an angle that should have torn the ship apart from the stress, went into a spin that would have liquefied most organic pilots, and slingshotted around Jupiter's gravity well at a speed that made the pursuing Krythari weapons look like they were moving in slow motion. "Oh, that pilot is definitely dead from the G-forces," Rena muttered, watching the display with wide eyes. "Probably," Vel'Kosh agreed. "Humans have this weird thing about gravity, though. They seem to think it's more of a guideline than a physical law." The Crazy Ivan popped back out from behind Jupiter's bulk, fired another salvo of relativistic rocks, took out 6 more Krythari ships, and then vanished behind Io, one of Jupiter's volcanic moons. The Krythari fleet, now thoroughly rattled and down 19 vessels to a single human lunatic in what was essentially a mining ship with delusions of grandeur, regrouped and continued their advance. That's when the rest of Earth's defensive strategy became apparent. The asteroid belt, that ring of rocks, ice, and various space debris between Mars and Jupiter, suddenly lit up with thousands upon thousands of energy signatures. At first, the Krythari sensors reported them as asteroids, which made sense given the location. Then the asteroids started moving in coordinated patterns, and the sensors revised their assessment to spacecraft. Numerous, small, and apparently very angry. What the Krythari had stumbled into was humanity's answer to traditional fleet doctrine. If you can't afford a massive military fleet, just arm everything that moves and some things that don't. The asteroid belt was full of mining stations, research outposts, and independent prospectors. Humans who decided that living in the cold vacuum of space was preferable to whatever they'd left behind on Earth. These weren't military personnel, these were engineers, scientists, and wildcatters, who'd been given approximately 3 hours' notice that hostile forces were approaching and had decided to do something about it. They'd done something about it, all right. Mining lasers designed to cut through solid rock were repurposed into weapons. Industrial fabricators had churned out thousands of drones, armed with shaped charges. One particularly creative group of engineers had strapped rocket engines to a small asteroid. Vel'Kosh later learned it was called Kevin, because humans named everything, and were currently steering it directly at the Krythari formation, like the universe's angriest bowling ball. The Krythari fleet found itself under attack from every direction simultaneously. Ships that should have been easy targets were proving impossible to hit because they kept hiding behind asteroids, popping out to take shots, and then disappearing again. The mining lasers, while not powerful enough to penetrate military-grade shields in one hit, were numerous enough that Krythari vessels found their defenses overwhelmed by sheer volume of fire. And Kevin, blessed, weaponized Kevin, plowed through the fleet's left flank like a wrecking ball made of stone and spite, destroying 4 cruisers and crippling 2 more before momentum carried it back into the belt. They militarized an entire asteroid field, Rena said, her voice carrying equal parts horror and admiration. They turned civilian mining infrastructure into a defensive network, and they probably did it in an afternoon, Vel'Kosh added, watching a Krythari battleship desperately trying to shoot down what appeared to be several hundred mining drones, swarming it like angry mechanical bees. This is what I've been trying to tell the Council for years. Humans don't think like we do. They see a problem and they solve it with whatever's available. Physics and common sense be damned. The Krythari fleet was down to 173 ships when they finally cleared the asteroid belt. Warlord Sk'reth, his scales standing on end from stress and his subordinates looking decidedly nervous, ordered the fleet to accelerate toward Mars. They'd lost nearly a quarter of their forces to civilian miners and 1 absolutely deranged human in a modified ore hauler, but they still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Surely, the humans wouldn't have anything else prepared. Mars' orbit proved him wrong. The defensive stations around Mars weren't hidden or camouflaged. They were just sitting there, obvious as anything painted in bright colors with human text written across them. Vel'Kosh's translator helpfully informed him that the largest station bore the words Fort Kickass, while another proclaimed itself the People's Democratic Defense Platform, now with extra democracy. A third simply said Steve with no further explanation. The stations opened fire at maximum range, and the Krythari discovered that humans had apparently decided that the contact of reasonable weapon size was for other species. The plasma cannons were larger than they had any right to be, firing bolts of superheated matter that could melt through shields and armor plating like butter. The railguns launched projectiles the size of small shuttles at velocities that made targeting computers weep. And then there were the missiles. Thousands of missiles, each one following erratic flight paths that suggested their guidance systems were either incredibly sophisticated or completely broken. Later analysis would reveal that both were true. Humans had programmed their missiles with what they called drunk flight patterns that made interception nearly impossible because even the missiles didn't know where they were going until the last second. Sk'reth's flagship took 3 direct hits in rapid succession, each one causing explosive decompression in different sections of the ship. Around him, the Krythari fleet was being systematically dismantled by Earth's fixed defenses, and they hadn't even reached the planet yet. Smaller human vessels, actual military craft this time, were darting in and out of the chaos, picking off damaged Krythari ships with surgical precision. One of them flew past the flagship's view screen close enough that Sk'reth could see the pilot giving him a gesture that his cultural database translated as deeply insulting origin. Ancient Earth, meaning go away. Perhaps, hissed one of Sk'reth's advisors, a younger Krythari named Vel'Moth, who'd been against this invasion from the start. We should consider a tactical withdrawal. Retreat? Sk'reth roared, his pride momentarily overriding his survival instinct. We still outnumber them. We still have. He checked the tactical display and his voice died in his throat. They had 119 ships left. 119 out of 200, and they weren't even at Earth yet. That's when Admiral Okafor's face appeared on every screen in the Krythari fleet simultaneously. Humans had apparently hacked their communications array, which shouldn't have been possible. But at this point Sk'reth was ready to believe humans could do anything they set their minds to, laws of physics notwithstanding. Warlord Sk'reth, Okafor said, her expression almost sympathetic. I'm going to do you a favor and tell you something that might save your life and the lives of everyone still under your command. Turn around, go home. Tell everyone that you changed your mind about this whole invasion thing. We'll even back up whatever story you want to tell. Equipment malfunction, unexpected solar flare, sudden attack of common sense, whatever works. But if you continue toward Earth, she paused, and her expression hardened. Well, everything you've seen so far, that was us being polite. That was us giving you chances to reconsider. If you actually threaten our planet, if you get close enough that our children can see your ships in the sky, We will stop being polite. And you really don't want to see what happens when humans stop being polite. In the council station, Vel'Kosh found himself holding his breath, an unconscious mimicry of human body language he'd picked up over the years. Around him, representatives from dozens of species watched the screens in silence. Everyone knew what happened next would set a precedent for how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. Sk'reth stared at his tactical display. 119 ships, thousands of Krythari warriors. The pride of his people's military might, and on the other side, one planet defended by beings who'd apparently decided that reality was optional, and warfare was just another engineering problem to be solved with sufficient creativity and violence. He looked at Vel'Moth, then at his other advisors, then at the image of Admiral Okafor waiting patiently for his response. For just a moment, Sk'reth's warrior pride warred with the very strong instinct for self-preservation that had kept his species alive for millennia. Pride said to push forward to prove Krythari's strength. Survival said that humans were absolutely not joking about things getting worse. Survival won. Signal the fleet, Sk'reth said quietly, his shoulders sagging. We're withdrawing. The Krythari Armada turned around and limped back toward neutral space, leaving behind the wreckage of 81 warships and what little remained of their collective dignity. Admiral Okafor watched them go, then turned to someone off-screen and said something that the communications array managed to pick up. Get me Commander Ruiz. He won that bet about them not even reaching Luna. In the observation deck, the assembled representatives erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once about what they'd just witnessed. Urena turned to Vel'Kosh, her tail swishing thoughtfully. They could have destroyed the entire fleet, she said. The humans had enough firepower in reserve to absolutely annihilate them. Yes, Vel'Kosh agreed. But they didn't. They gave Sk'reth a way out. A way to save face and retreat without complete humiliation. That's the thing about humans. They can be terrifying when they need to be, but they'd almost always rather not be. They prefer their enemies to become friends, or at least to become people who've learned not to bother them. He gestured at the retreating Krythari fleet. Sk'reth will go home. He'll tell his people about the insane humans who defended their planet with mining equipment and overclocked weapons. And the Krythari will never attack Earth again. They might even become allies eventually. That's how humans win wars. They don't just defeat you, they make you wonder why you were fighting in the first place. 3 cycles later, Vel'Kosh attended a council session where the Krythari formally apologized for the incident and proposed a cultural exchange program with Earth. Warlord Sk'reth, who'd been demoted to Ambassador Sk'reth after his military disaster, gave a surprisingly eloquent speech about the importance of understanding one's neighbors before making assumptions about their capabilities. The motion passed unanimously. As the session ended and representatives filed out of the chamber, Vel'Kosh spotted a familiar human in the corridor. Commander Hector Ruiz, the accordion-wielding diplomat himself, apparently on Earth's permanent council delegation now. Ruiz caught his eye and walked over, a slight smile on his weathered face. Ambassador Vel'Kosh, Ruiz said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. I heard you tried to warn the Krythari about us. Vel'Kosh grasped the offered hand and shook it carefully. Humans liked a firm grip, but not too firm. I did. They didn't listen. They never do, Ruiz said with a shrug. But they learn. They always learn. He glanced around the corridor at the various species going about their diplomatic business, then back at Vel'Kosh. Between you and me, we were actually terrified. The Krythari are serious warriors, and if they'd pressed their advantage at any point, things could have gone very differently. Vel'Kosh's 3 eyes widened. You were afraid, terrified, Ruiz confirmed. But that's the thing about humans. We're really good at pretending we're not. We call it fake it till you make it. Works surprisingly well in both combat and diplomacy. He smiled again. That infuriatingly confident human smile. Same principle applies to my accordion playing, actually. I'm absolutely terrible at it, but I commit to the bit and somehow that makes it work. As Ruiz walked away, presumably to go traumatize some other species with his questionable musical skills, Vel'Kosh found himself laughing again, that tumbling rocks sound that startled a passing Vox diplomat. He'd been observing humans for years now, had watched them confound, bewilder, and occasionally terrify the galaxy with their peculiar brand of chaos and ingenuity. And he'd learned something important: you didn't attack Earth. Not because humanity had the biggest fleet or the most advanced weapons, though their creativity with both was impressive. You didn't attack Earth because humans had somehow managed to convince everyone, including themselves, that they were simultaneously the friendliest neighbors you could ask for, and the absolute last beings you wanted as enemies. They were right on both counts. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, a miner named Chen was reattaching a laser drill to its proper mounting, having spent the last 3 cycles using it to defend his home. On Mars, the crew of Fort Kickass was repainting their station after taking plasma damage, adding tally marks for each Krythari ship they'd helped disable. And in the asteroid formerly known as Kevin, a small plaque was being installed by a group of emotional engineers, commemorating the rock's brave sacrifice in the defense of humanity. The galaxy would remember the day the Krythari tried to invade Earth. They'd remember it as a warning, a lesson, and if Vel'Kosh was being honest, a pretty entertaining story to share over drinks at diplomatic functions. And humanity? They'd already moved on to their next project. Apparently someone had proposed turning the moon into a giant laser, and the debate over whether this was awesome or maybe a bit much was currently dominating Earth's communications networks. Vel'Kosh made a mental note to increase his insurance coverage. Something told him he was going to need it.